Good morning and welcome to Morning Scoop for Monday, November 1st. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Nebraska game is in 5 days. The game against Michigan in 26 days. It is, in fact, November 1st. And as Jim Tressel always liked to remind us, September is for pretenders. November is for contenders. So we will leave Chrissy Hine back in a couple months ago. We're going to be talking about the Big Ten championship race today. My guest today is Buckeye Scoop's Tony Gerdeman. Tony joins me. Tony, I don't know if we learned more or less about what the Big Ten race is actually going to look like after watching a full day of college football on Saturday. It felt like that was supposed to be like one of those, separation Saturday kind of days. And I don't know if anyone really separated one direction or another in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me back in high school when I missed a week of school and I came back and everybody else had learned some new geometry formulas and I had no clue and I was a little bit lost. And it's like I knew most of what was going on, and then I was gone for a little bit and I come back and then I'm like I don't know any of this. And that's kind of what is going on with the Big Ten right now, because you go into the week with some preconceived notions, and then you see what happens, and some of it is true, others aren't. Like I think we both expected more from Ohio State, and now it's like, whose fault was that? Was that Penn State's? Is that Penn State's credit, or is that Ohio State's fault? Plenty of different questions that we now have and are trying to figure out, that may get figured out this season, may not.
Yeah, it felt like you learned for everything you thought you knew about a team, and had something confirmed, or you learned something new that it was like, oh, this is positive for them. There was something else that was like, oh no, that's not good. And that's kind of in college football on the whole this year. It's like there's Georgia, and Georgia's really good and very clearly number one, and everyone else is like, well, number two Cincinnati has had back-to-back weeks of struggling against one-win teams. Like, yep, that's college football in 2021. That's it right there. One team that I think we felt like we knew kind of what they were a couple weeks ago, and now it's like, no, maybe not. Wisconsin. Yeah, I just have a bullet point here that just says Wisconsin is Wisconsin. It's like, well, a couple weeks ago they looked like they're bad. Graham Mertz can't do anything. And then they just stomped Iowa on Saturday. Just the defense looked suffocating. They weren't dominating. They weren't fantastic in offense or anything, but, so I guess that means Iowa's bad too, which I think is a fair takeaway there. But, Minnesota is all alone in first place in the West Division, but they do have Wisconsin left on the schedule. It just, to me, feels like all of a sudden the West is trending very much like you might have Wisconsin back in Indianapolis again in a month or so.
Yeah, almost out of nowhere, but they will be playing for Paul Bunyan's Axe in Minnesota, so maybe that's definitely something good for the Gophers. But yeah, Wisconsin has yet to lose to the Big Ten West. They've lost to Penn State and they've lost to Michigan. And credit Penn State for that win, and credit like if Michigan and Wisconsin played again, it wouldn't be a 38-17. I tend to think Wisconsin would do better. That was in Madison. Mm-hmm. And it was just, I think it was a bit of a bizarre result then, and would be even more bizarre result now, because it feels like things are getting better. They're running the ball a little bit better, but Graham Mertz, maybe they're asking less of him, and maybe we're working around him and just kind of not ignoring him. He's still part of it, but not asking him to do too much, because asking him to do much was too much. Asking him to do less, I guess, is enough.
Yeah, basically you go through some of their losses earlier in the year, like the Notre Dame loss, which you didn't mention earlier because obviously that was a non-conference loss, but that game was 13-10 in the beginning of the fourth quarter, and then Notre Dame returns a kickoff for a touchdown. Then they had a couple pick sixes at the end of the game where it ended up 41-13. It was like, what? How did that happen? If you don't have, that is the classic Wisconsin quarterback. We when they brought in Mertz, it was like, he is not the traditional Wisconsin quarterback. This is not just another, John Stocco or fill in the blank of whatever Wisconsin quarterback you want over the last 20 years or so. This is not just another game manager who's going to hand the ball off and maybe, every once in a while throw a play action pass to a tight end. This guy's gonna be different. It's like, what if he just have him be a Wisconsin quarterback? That may be enough with as good as his defense is. If they can run the ball a little bit better, maybe that's going to be enough. One team that couldn't run the ball much at all on Saturday, which was kind of a surprise to me, was Michigan. Michigan went into that Michigan State game, and it was, they're favored by 4 points on the road. This is it. They're gonna show Michigan State who's boss. They've got this dominating run game. They're running up 300 yards. They're right near the top of the nation in September. Remember what we said about September in the beginning of the show? They're up near the top of the nation in rushing yards in September. And then you get to Michigan State, and it's a cloudy, gray Big Ten day. And boy, Michigan couldn't run the ball at all. And that seems like that's going to be a problem for them.
Yeah, and if you look at these statistics right now, overall, Michigan is still leading the Big Ten in rushing at 239.9 yards per game. That's in their 8 games. Conference games only, however, tell a much different story, where Michigan is 6th in the Big Ten in rushing, averaging 173.6 yards per game. To give you an idea of how different life is in the Big Ten. And so they're averaging 4.1 yards per carry in Big Ten play. Overall, 5.4. So just that's a huge disparity of what they average in non-conference versus what they average in regular. Yes, 7.2 yards in non-conference games, 4.1 in conference games. It's just two entirely different animals. So we knew when Michigan is rushing for 300 yards, that's not actually who they were. And we would see who they were once they got to the Big Ten. And now we've seen that. And it's, 146 yards against Michigan State. It's 112 yards against Wisconsin. It's 112 yards against Rutgers. I believe that is more the actual Michigan running game, as opposed to the 294 against Northwestern, the 204 against Nebraska. It seems at this point you don't have to have a great defense to really slow down the Michigan running game, and that's not good for Michigan, as we saw this week.
No, because they ended up with a good solid day out of Cade McNamara. He ended up with 300 and what? It was a very impressive day, 380 something yards passing, whatever it was. A couple real big passes to Andrew Anthony. They hit some big plays in the passing game, which is something they hadn't really done. But they, similar to Ohio State, bogged down in the red zone a little bit, and you're going to have to kick. You're going to have to score touchdowns if you're going to win in this league. This is not the 2003 Big Ten anymore, where you're going to win 17-13. You got to score touchdowns. So that's a little bit of a concern for Michigan. Michigan State, no real concerns on the ground because they have Kenneth Walker, and Kenneth Walker is good at the footballs. That is the big takeaway. He had another big day against Michigan, but Michigan State, who earlier in the year we were talking about, Peyton Thorne, and oh boy, they're real. They can run the ball, they can throw the ball. Peyton Thorne against a Michigan defense, which is not great in the past game. I think we're still kind of treating the Michigan secondary as a little bit of a question mark. Didn't have a real good day against that Michigan secondary. The Michigan State offensive line really struggled in pass pro against Aiden Hutchinson, David Ajabo. If Michigan State is one-dimensional Michigan State again, and they don't have the Mark D'Antonio level defense, like they've got a solid defense, but not a Mark D'Antonio level defense, then it's like, well, then you're just poor man's Mark D'Antonio, and that doesn't seem like that's necessarily going to get it done in against the teams they have left on the schedule.
Yeah, Peyton Thorne started out pretty well the first few games, has thrown 6 interceptions on the season. 4 of those have been in the last 2 games. Against Indiana, threw for 126 yards with 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Against Michigan, 196 yards with no touchdowns and 2 interceptions. So I think we're finding out who he is, and he's somewhere between the bad Brian Lewerke and the average Brian Lewerke, maybe, as opposed to the good Brian Lewerke we saw as like a redshirt sophomore or whatever. He's somewhere in there and needs to continue to progress. But at this point, if you get that out of him, that's a bonus. I think you can't expect him to be, he's going to complete 65% of the passes, throw for 250 yards, not turn the ball over, pick up key third downs with his feet. I think if he does that, then that's a complete bonus, and you can't expect it. You can hope for it. You could say you could set him up to do those things, but he still has to execute, and execution has been not his strong suit at times. He can make plays and he can make them at the right times, but if he's just consistent, I think that would be better than the hit or miss, never knowing which you're going to get.
Something that was a little hit or miss for Ohio State on Saturday night was the offensive line, where sometimes they would open holes and Trevion Henderson would go run for a real long gain. And there were other times when there was a whole bunch of misses. And that a lot like Michigan, resulted in a lot of field goals in the red zone. There were plenty of things that I think Ohio State fans were expecting to see on Saturday that did not see. To me, that was the biggest potential concern moving forward. You have good teams on the schedule moving forward. You've got Michigan State, you've got Michigan coming up. Purdue is not looking like an absolute gimme now. Nebraska, who knows? They may play them close and then blow it late. Anything could happen with a Scott Frost team, but to me, I came into this weekend thinking the Ohio State offensive line was very clearly going to be one of the best in the country. Had dominated most teams they faced. Now it's like that's a little bit more of a question mark to me now, because you saw them against Penn State and the holes that were there for Trevion Henderson were not there. They were fine in pass pro, but the holes just weren't opening up in the run game. Is that a concern to you moving forward? Is that something that, changes how you view Ohio State's ceiling for the rest of the year?
Well, I think it's something worth noting. And this is I'm just looking through the game logs right now. This is the first time since 2018 Ohio State has gone 3 games in a row under 200 yards rushing. And we know what 2018 was. That was Dwayne Haskins passing attack. I think this is a better running game than that. I think we would all agree with that. And so maybe some of the lack of running is more decision based, just Brian Day, like this is what defenses are giving us, so that's what we're going to take. But going through it, and I'm to 2012 now, and there's still been no other instances of 3 consecutive games. I'm sure I'll find it in 2011. Not even 2011. So like you have to keep going back to find 3 straight games of under 200 yards rushing. And that's pretty, Jim Tressel's last year, 2010 in the Big Ten in October, 3 straight games under 200 yards rushing that weren't a Dwayne Haskins thing. So this doesn't happen. Now, how worked up should people get when you still have, I haven't looked at the latest stats, but I assume they're top 3 total offense, the yards per play, all of that stuff. But yeah, it's a concern, but they're still averaging 5 yards a carry, 5.8 yards per carry, 4.7. But a lot of that 4.7 against Penn State was a 68 yarder. So it's not nothing.
And, it's one team that's kind of the other direction here is Penn State, who I think we came into the weekend thinking they've lost 2 games now, both in conference. You're going to lose to Ohio State, so you're going to be out of the conference, the conference race. They look terrible against Illinois. Like, this is a team you can kind of maybe write off, and maybe Michigan goes in there and beats them, and maybe they beat, maybe Michigan State takes care of them at the end of the year. And so this is not a team you need to really worry about as a factor in the Big Ten East race anymore. And then they came into the Ohio State game and they played really well, and they weren't perfect, and they still can't run the ball worth a lick. And, but Sean Clifford looked much better. Sean Clifford looked much healthier. You never know, is this, did Penn State, basically punt the Illinois game and figure they were just going to kind of be able to coast and then just focus on Ohio State for 2 weeks? I've seen that posited a few places, and it's like, I couldn't say no to that, because it kind of looked like they punted the Illinois game and figured they could kind of coast and put all their effort into the Ohio State game. But, that to me on Saturday night, the way they stopped the run for Ohio State, the way they threw the ball and were able to move, consistently pick up those 3rd downs against Ohio State, that to me looked like a team that, they're not going to win the East at this point with 3 conference losses, but they could very well have a say in terms of who does win that Eastern Division.
Penn State coming in 3 losses in a row by a total of 14 points. So that's a heartbreaker for them, but they can certainly ruin. They can bring along some other heartbreakers with them. They've got Michigan in 2 weeks. That's in Happy Valley. And then they close the season at Michigan State for the formerly known as Land Grant Trophy that I don't think exists any longer, which is just a shame. Such a trophy as long and storied is no longer played for, if that is the truth, the fact. But yeah, this is an opportunity for them to get something out of the season. And anytime you can beat Michigan, no matter what team you are in the Big Ten, that's something. It makes you feel good. And that's something that, Penn State loses to Ohio State, but they feel like they could have won that. So that it's not a moral victory. It's just a sense of we were close. We can stay close. We can just continue to build from this and learn from that and not let it happen again. I think that's a lot of it. And I can see them. I mean, would you be shocked if they went 4-0? Because this was the best we've seen Sean Clifford in a while. It's going to be tough for them because they can't run the ball. But with that defense, and if Sean Clifford is staying healthy and continuing to hit, if they continue to pick up 70% of their third downs, Tom, don't you think there's a chance that Penn State can go 4-0 to finish the season?
Yeah, there's some question about the sustainability of that, but if they can do that, then yes, I think you've got a pretty good chance. That's that's like if Andrew Anthony continues to have average 25 yards a catch for Michigan every game from here on out, they've got a decent chance of moving the chains a decent amount. But yes, just FYI, if you Google Land Grant Trophy, one of the things that Google will suggest as an autofill is Land Grant Trophy ugly, which seems harsh but fair. And it does appear that they still play for it. They did play for it. They did play for it last year. So unless that went away after 2020, it does appear that will still be contested, and it does still look like someone went to just a bunch of yard sales in a like middle class neighborhood and just spent. Well, I have $7.23, and I'm going to spend every dime of it here, and I'm going to make me a trophy. And Penn State and Michigan State will play for it later in the year. But it feels like this was a weekend where the high ceiling teams in the Big Ten East maybe saw the ceilings drop a little bit. The teams that you thought were kind of a little bit lower in the Big Ten East saw their floors kind of raise. Sort of the same thing in the Big Ten West, where it was like you had kind of written off Penn State, you kind of written off Wisconsin. All of a sudden, like these teams may have a say, and Wisconsin might actually have a chance to win that Big Ten West. So should be a fun November in the Big Ten. Lots of interesting games going. I mean, this is the Big Ten. I don't know that they intentionally did this, but they have kind of backloaded the really good games on the schedule this month, which is, that makes for a lot of small numbers next to teams' names on the weekly schedule, which makes for a lot of hype, a lot of excitement, and a lot of interesting football. So you can follow along with all of that here with us here. We have our podcasts on. We do the Buckeye Weekly podcast. We also do the Morning Scoop. You can follow along with those with us here on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. You can search Buckeye Scoop to find out those and all of our other shows. You can also find us on YouTube, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. You can subscribe to that channel and then get notified every time we drop a new show. So we'll have a much more in-depth discussion of the Ohio State Michigan, or the Michigan State game dropping on Monday with the Michigan Monday episode of our Buckeye Weekly podcast. That'll be coming out a little later on today. So make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our podcast feeds, and then you get notified and you get that episode delivered right to you. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.